So nurturing our people in the horticulture industry through supporting diversity and development is really vital for our industry. Succession planning helps to enable businesses and people to stay in horticulture where appropriate and to move out when it's not right for them. Our next speaker is Pryor, a highly respected consultant who specialises in family business advisory in New Zealand and also in Australia. So after Philip's presentation, he's then going to facilitate a discussion with two growing families who've recently been through the succession planning process. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage Philip Pryor.
Hello, and thank you for coming here this afternoon. I realise that I'm standing between you and lunch, so hopefully it'll be an entertaining and hopefully informative session today. I realise actually you've all been sitting here for probably about an hour or so, so can I get you to just stand up, shake around? I don't want anyone falling asleep, and can you perhaps introduce yourself to the person next door, say hello, that sort of thing. All that embarrassing stuff that goes on that presenters do. Excellent, good. Get a bit of energy in the room. Excellent, excellent. All right, thank you everybody, that is fantastic. So this session is on the dreaded succession. I'm sure you've heard various talks and that sort of thing before about it. I'm here hopefully to give you a slightly different take on it. It frankly is all my work is around succession and working with families that run businesses of some sort or another. I grew up in Blenheim, and I was part of a family business in Blenheim. That family business doesn't exist anymore, even though my mother, I don't know, is anyone from Marlborough or Blenheim here in the room? No, okay. She was this quite formidable woman, I have to say, and she's really the matriarch of Blenheim. They were in business since 1946, and she died in 1992, something like that. She's still vaguely remembered. I go to Blenheim, I work with some people there, except the business doesn't exist. In fact, where the business was is now the ANZ parking lot in the centre of town. And so part of my work is how do we actually make sure that, we talked about sustainability earlier today, how do we make sure our businesses are sustainable from a family perspective? That's really important. So growing up in Blenheim, I got to learn all sorts of things. I used to drive pea harvesters when I was at university in my school holidays. And I remember when the vineyards started coming in. And people were sort of sucking air through their teeth and going, ooh, nah, it'll never last, right? And Marlborough is what it is today with all that. So the thing is, I learned a lot from that. I learned a lot from the family business that doesn't exist anymore. I went off to university, I did a psychology degree, I lived in the US, I lived in the UK. I worked clinically with a lot of families and some pretty stroppy families in the US. And then I started a slightly saner business, working with corporates and that sort of thing. And then I discovered family businesses. So I've worked with about 120, 130 of them in New Zealand and Australia. I've worked with a number of horticultural businesses. And you're going to see a couple of them coming up here. I've worked with Allan and Dermott and Patrick. I haven't worked with, but their story is extraordinary. So this is really going to be in two parts. One is going to be some theory from me, hopefully not too long, hopefully not too boring. And then we're actually going to hear actually how they did it. And this is the really important part, because there's all sorts of ways that you can skin a cat here. So can I quickly ask, another vaguely interactive aspect, how many of the current or senior generation people have we got in the room? Can you just put your hand up? Yes, okay, we've got a few, all right, good. How many of the next generation? Oh, good, a proud next gen, okay, yep, all right. So I'm talking to both of you as we go through this. So, hang on, it's working, okay. So some of the challenges that you've got is every family business that I work with, whether it's a farming business or a business, they'll say, we don't want to let the business damage the family relationships, and they mean it. And yet, we see every so often, not too often, thank God, situations where families are completely blown up. I worked with a family in the Manawatu area, and I was pulled in too late. The father, by that stage, had Alzheimer's. I literally couldn't get the 5 children into the same room. Literally could not. They would not meet. During the work that I was trying to do, he died, and then the will was read. Now, you could hear the explosion from Wellington. All right? And that family will never have Christmas dinner again together. All right? So this is the downside. You are combining, for those of you who are doing this, you are combining your 2 most important things, your family and your business. And the potential is to screw both up, but even more potential is for both to really grow and thrive. And that's what I want to talk about today. How do we do that? So the second area is, who do we find? Who wants to actually take on the gig? And what do they need to learn? Because they need to learn a lot. And a whole part of this is, how do we download for the current generation, all this extraordinary knowledge and wisdom that you've got in your heads into the next generation, right? And getting them to listen to it. We need to have, the current generation needs to be comfortable. You've worked for decades, possibly 4 or possibly 5 decades building this thing up. So you want to make sure you're comfortable it's passing on. You want to make sure you're financially comfortable and that you're actually interested and happy with what's happening in the next stage. I'll talk about that in a moment. And any conversations that you have, write them down. I worked with a family in the Waikato, I've been working with them for a while now, and they said, yeah, we had 10 years of meetings, Phil. And I said, great. I said, where's the documents? They said, oh, no, we didn't write anything down. So now we're having arguments over who remembers what in the what meetings 12 years ago. All right, so write stuff down, whether it's formally as a family charter, and Allan will talk a little bit about that, or whether it is informally, write it down. So I wouldn't be a good consultant if I didn't have a 3-circle model, okay? So bear with me on this one, right? I developed this a while ago, and there are 3 elements when you're working with family. You need a level of transparency, right? If you don't have transparency, you've got conspiracy theories, right? And particularly when in-laws are involved and that sort of thing, the dreaded in-laws, that sort of thing, you need to be able to start sharing what is going on. Probably the best example I've seen in a family council meeting, the parents put their wills on the table, literally put them copies in front of every one of their children and said, there you go, any questions? That's transparency, okay? And that just took all the arguments out, right? Now, they may not have agreed with it, but it's like they knew what was going on, okay? In my family, my mother didn't tell my brother what was in her will. And I'm not going to go into a lot of stories a long story on this one, because actually that happened 33 years ago. My brother still can't talk about it. But the guts of the story was she died very suddenly. He, after 3 days and of funerals and God knows what, right, we're sitting in the solicitor's office. The will was read. He wasn't in it for various reasons, and he completely lost his shit. Right? He didn't talk to me for 10 years. Right? Now, if my mother had just said to him, dear, this is what's in my will. Right? And a lawyer friend of mine describes the will as it's your last love letter. Make it a good one. All right? That transparency is so important. Fairness is the other one. Any of you who've got kids, you all know have got this eagle eye out for what's fair and what's not fair. Right? My youngest daughter complained to me and was grumpy with me after her 18th birthday. And I went, oh God, okay, what's the problem? And she said, you spent more money on Catherine's 18th birthday than mine. I was like, oh God, okay. And I'm supposed to be aware of this stuff, right? But we are constantly managing fairness. It is a perception. Just because somebody says with strong words, it's not fair, does not mean it isn't fair. It means they feel that way. And actually, you've got to be able to address it. And sometimes when you get the facts on the table, they go, oh, okay, no, I'm sorry, I was wrong. But if you don't address it, it starts becoming the seed of conflict. So if someone is really starting getting annoyed or irritated around something's not fair, you need to address it. You just can't put it under the carpet. And of course, if we're going to do all this, we have to be able to have the honest conversations. Get those three in place and trust builds. And that is your biggest asset. As a family in business, having trust is your biggest, most precious asset. You can lose it in a moment, but if you've got it there, it's just the most amazing thing. So, succession, the dreaded succession. Now, I talk about it as being your best generation. It does not mean retirement. All right? A lot of people get really worried. I'm going to talk about why we're scared of this. I've got a book coming out very soon. There's going to be a shameless plug for it very shortly, right? But there's this sense of, that succession means I'm just going to be, shoved into the backyard, or I don't come to work anymore, or on this particular date, the kids are taking over and I just bugger off. That's not the case. It's a process. And so it does not mean retirement. So if you have a thing of, I was thinking about a scale, right? What I call the involvement scale. So if 0 on the involvement scale is you have hitched the caravan up and you are driving around the country for the next 3 years, that's 0. 10 on the other side is you're still fully involved. The difference is you've created space for the next generation so they can actually learn. That's the only thing you've got to do. You can still keep doing what you're doing, but create space. It's a conversation. More than anything else, this whole game is sitting down and talking. I remember I was at a conference in Invercargill years ago, and they talked about there's a 76-year-old farmer in the room, and someone said, yeah, well, what about succession? And he said, don't you worry about that, plenty of time. Okay? That's not the case. Okay? Start early. Right? I've got families where I'll have 13 and 14 and 15-year-olds in the room when we start talking about this stuff. Right? And they're years away from knowing whether they want to be involved or not. But actually, teenagers, kids rise to the occasion. So the earlier you start, the cheaper and easier it is. And the key thing is each generation's learning from the other. All right? This is part of the conversation. The next generation is going to come along with a whole bunch of ideas about technology and AI and all that stuff that none of us understand. Okay? And the current generation, or the senior generation, have got years of wisdom, decades of sleepless nights, dealing with the banks, fighting the weather, all that stuff, which they also need to learn. The next generation's ideas are not all going to be right, and the way the current generation did it is also not always going to be right. But if you've got the sharing of ideas, then all sorts of really interesting stuff can happen. And I know, actually, for both Dermott and Allan, they've got some great examples of that. You have particular questions to answer. Right? So let's go through those. Sorry, wrong slide. Before we do, everyone's scared in family business. There's a real fear. And some of those fears, particularly for the current generation, are around, I don't want to raise the issue because my kids will get upset, or they'll think I'm favoriting one of them, or something like that. Right? This is a huge fear. It is usually, the fear is far worse than actual reality. We often catastrophize and go, oh my God, no, we can't mention that. Don't mention the war type of thing. All right? It is usually not as bad, and that's one of the things that stops us. We're talking about our mortality, and the reality is we are. But it's actually, what's the legacy? What do you want your kids to do with your hard work? What benefits do you want your grandchildren to get? That's what we're talking about. I was once escorted from a room after 10 minutes of talking by our father said, you're talking about my death all the time. Okay, I didn't get them as a client. But actually, we are talking about that. That is the reality. There's a huge fear of no relevance, right? And this is something that really drives us because we're smart, we've worked bloody hard, and this fear of, I'm not going to be relevant anymore. Actually, you are. Boredom, right? If I don't come to work, what on earth do I do? And farmers are really bad at this. I've got an 84-year-old farmer in the Waikato who I've been working with for a while. All he wants to do is get on his motorbike and round up a herd of sheep. It's all he wants to do. He can't, right? His body's actually given up. He's on his 4th knee reconstruction. So that boredom is a huge fear. And then what's our purpose for getting out of bed? Why? Right? What's our reason here? And then, of course, retirement. Right? I was talking about this a few years ago in a session, and I had a parent yell from the back of the room going, "Don't you put me out to pasture." And that's the big fear. Okay? And that's the relevant stuff, all that sort of thing. So for the current generation, you need an exciting plan. Right? I'll cover this. Now, some of the questions. Always starts with the current generation or the senior generation, being their best generation. First question is, are you going to sell this thing or are you going to pass it on? First fundamental question. What are you going to do? Right? If you're going to sell, let you go down that road. Right? If you're going to go down that transition road, then you've also got this next one here. What's your next exciting plan? How involved do you want to be? Where are you? 0 to 10 on the involvement scale. What do you want to do? For me, I'm going sailing. Right? I'm an avid sailor. I'm heading around the Kimberleys. I'm in Australia. I'm heading around the Pacific. And that's my goal. Right? For me, it's very simple. You've got to work out what it means for you. I did this with a couple in Christchurch a couple of years ago, and I said, what's your 5 to 10 year plan? They came back after an hour and a half and said, we have no idea. Right? So I came back again, and I said, think about it more. And after 2 hours, they finally started to come up with something. And that family is starting to work in that space now. But you need a plan of some sort. So if you're going down the transition road, a couple more questions for you to think about. How do you create space for the next gen? That's really, frankly, the only requirement. It's the conversations and create space. So they actually have a genuine seat at the table. You're not doing everything. You're not making all the decisions. But how do you do that? What do you need for your own financial security? What do you need to feel comfortable? Whether that is what they're doing with your business, how it's being run, that sort of stuff, there's that comfort factor. You haven't worked all this time for just walk away and go, I don't care. You do care. So we need to talk about that. And how are you going to teach them? Because actually, while your title might have been managing director or boss or person in charge or whatever the hell it is, actually you're now a teacher and a mentor and a coach. And part of your job is downloading all that information that you've got, all that wisdom, all that hard-won knowledge into their heads in some way or another. For the next generation in the room, you've got some questions also. Are you prepared to put the time in to learn and get up to speed and probably get paid really shit wages? Right? Family businesses are terrible at paying decent wages. Right? And that's just what happens. Are you prepared to work with your siblings and your parents? Right? Even if you don't like your siblings very much, right? Or they irritate you, that's probably part of what's going to have to happen here. Are you prepared to have the robust discussions and really sort of go, okay, yeah, we need to talk about this? Are you prepared as the next generation to bring your ideas, but also listen to what's been done in the past? Right? There's that listening, and it's a two-way street, of course. You're going to work hard, like really work hard. Right? I imagine the hours you do, if you worked out what your hourly rate is, it would be terrifying. And also the financial risks. Know what you're getting yourself in for. Succession is in 3 parts. Succession of leadership, succession of ownership, and succession of directorship. They all bring different responsibilities. And then also merit. Right? Next generation needs to be judged on merit. Are you good enough to take on this role? I love you dearly, but actually, have you got the skills? Have you got the knowledge? Or what do you need to do to get the skills and knowledge? That's the thing they have to be ready for. And I've seen some incredibly awful dunderhead males take on roles where, in fact, it's the younger sister who's the ideal person for this. Merit is the way you get around fairness. The days of the older son getting the gig hopefully are over. Sometimes it's 2 kids who get the gig. And one in Christchurch at the moment, I've got a sister and a brother who are going to be taking over the business. And they're going to be brilliant because they work really well together. I've got one family, and I work with in Australia, where there's 3. Takes a bit of setting up, but it can be done. Right? And sometimes it takes 2 or more siblings to be able to do the same of what the parents did themselves. Some general rules. Start early. I mentioned that earlier before. Talk, communicate, and write all your discussions down. Listen to each other. Manage the emotions. If you start early, you've got time. Sometimes these conversations might take 3, 4, 5 years. That's fine. right? Things change, develop, hot button topics sometimes reduce, but you've got to manage the emotions. And if the emotions are getting too high, pause, stop, whether it's for half an hour or whether it's for a week or two, right? Don't let people say things they can't unsay. There's always going to be backward steps, right? The family I was talking about in Christchurch, I was just down there last week, and there were some backward steps. There was quite a level of irritation by the two kids who are going to take over about what their father was doing. You know, that happens, but it's a process. Be creative. There's all sorts of ways to skin a cat, and be adaptable. Things can and do change. Technologies change. All sorts of possibilities come up, particularly when you start sharing ideas as we go through. So when you've got transition working well, there's a couple of really key benefits here, and I'll bring up my people very shortly. Everyone relaxes because there's a plan. Daughter-in-laws and son-in-laws relax. I get a number of referrals from daughters-in-law who say, what the hell is going on? Why is my partner working all hours God sends and I don't know what's going to happen? What's going to happen to my kids? Or if something happens to him, do I have to go begging to my in-laws? Right? And farms are really tricky because often you're living in houses that are owned by the farm. And they go, well, what security have I got? But when you have a plan in place, people relax. The senior generation is excited about what they're going to do, and some idea of a great plan. Members of the next generation know what the expectations are. There's no surprises, right? They can go do extra courses or extra training or go and work somewhere else or whatever it is that they're doing. The senior generation's concern levels are low, right? They've got a sense of, yeah, there's a plan and this is what's going to happen. There are ongoing conversations. Things are fine-tuned. It always happens. And your stakeholders relax. Probably one of the saddest stories I heard was a couple in their 70s, and they had built up this really impressive business. And the mum came to me at one point and she said, I know that if my husband and I were killed tomorrow or died tomorrow, that our stakeholders, our banks, our creditors, our staff, have no faith in our boys running the business. Right? And at that point, they were in their mid-40s. There was really not much we could do. And I think they're just going to sell. Right? If you want to sell, great. But don't be forced into selling. All right, here's the shameless plug. Coming out in October. And I'm hoping it makes some sense. But this is what you've heard today is the core of a lot of it. So let's bring the panelists on. I'm very disappointed. Dermott refused to bring his colander. He said that the apparel was not right. But let me introduce who we've got coming up. Dermott and Patrick Malley from Mangatapi Berries in Northland. And we've got Allan Fong from the Fresh Grower. Please give them a hand. This is the really important part. Now, so you've got mics there. Excellent. All right. Yes. Now, we were talking before this came, and part of my problem is going to be shutting them up. We asked Kate at about 11:30 whether we could get another hour, and for some reason she said we couldn't. So we're just going to have to deal with it. We've got about 40 minutes. If you have questions, I have the magic technology here. Send them through or put your hand up and speak to a mic. I want to make this as interactive as I possibly can. So can I start off? Dermott and Patrick, can you give us an overview? What do you do? What's been going on? I actually tried to get Alan's daughter, Jess, up here today. Unfortunately, she couldn't make it. I think Jess is probably the one person Alan's really scared of, and I've seen them have arguments, and my God, Alan doesn't stand a chance.
I am.
Yeah, exactly. So I'll represent Jess, if you like, on this one. So Dermott and Patrick, can you give us an introduction? What do you do?
Great example of family business. We can't even decide who's going to speak first.
I know, I can tell.
So I'll be magnanimous and hand it over.
I'd just like to apologise on behalf of the two important parts of our business who aren't here, who are running the business at home, my wife and my daughter-in-law. So please remember that nearly all farming businesses are a joint venture of male and female. It's
Yes.
very rarely just one side.
So for those that don't know, Patrick Malley, Dermott Malley, we have an orcharding business up in Maungataupiri, which is 15 minutes west of Fong. Grow kiwi fruit, kiwi berries, and a range of berry fruit with a bunch of partners, some of which are here today. And we also have a blueberry packing operation as well, which packs for a multitude of growers in Northland. About 37 hectares across the crops, about 45 full-time staff, and peaks at 180 staff. So it can be a busy business at times. And it's been an interesting journey with succession amongst the two of us. How much in depth do you want me to go at the moment?
We'll come into it, right? Because what I'm interested in is what worked, what were the hard parts, but what were the easy parts. But I'll come back to that in a moment. But I might pass to Allan and get him to introduce himself. Allan, what do you do?
So I'm Allan, and I'm first generation New Zealander, so my parents are immigrants from China. So they were both illiterate, and so they couldn't read or write. So we farm in Pukekohe, a mixture of crops, and we trade under the Fresh Grower brand. I've got two families in our business, sort of. So my mum and dad, they had five. I've got four others, or I had four other siblings. So there's five in our family. Unfortunately, we lost one of our sisters, so there's actually four. But when my mum and dad actually wrote their wills, my mum's actually still alive, but she was, unlike conventional Asian families who actually pass on the assets and what have you to the sons of the family, or a son, right? They split it up evenly amongst the children. So they were quite progressive, I thought, in that sense. So, and we were really grateful for that, even though it was a very small holding. But as we come to the next generation, that has not caused us, but it has come up with some challenges for us going forward. So anyway, I can leave it at that for now.
Excellent. All right, thank you. Patrick and Dermott, can you give us a sense of what you've done? Because you've done it by yourself. I've worked with Allan for probably about 7 or 8 years now, right, Allan? But you guys have done it. So talk us through how that's worked for you, what you've been doing, because it's been very successful, I think.
Well, you use the word done, it's not finished,
No,
and it
fair
probably shall never be finished. We've gone through a transition and are going through a transition at the moment where I'm now taking over the management role within the business, and I described it to someone earlier in sort of residential terms as managed retreat. So I'm managing the retreat of Dermott and Lindsay into other areas of the business, and I think that the key thing that we've always had as a family is that the four of us have been involved, myself and my wife Rebecca, have been involved at the strategic and management levels for a long time. Even though we may not have been in the decision or the power-making positions, we've had influence and had the ability to say our piece for a long period throughout the business, and it's only more recently that we've affected the change, I think, within the last 12 months, where you've stepped out of the formal management position that I've stepped into. Having said that, it's a family business. As soon as he turns up on the orchard, all the staff go flocking to him and asking for questions, and things go out the window. And anyone that will know Dermott will know he's quite reserved about it, so of course that doesn't become a problem. But it means that there's constant challenges. So every day, every week, there's always things that we're having to manage together, and they're not always easy. Dermott has his own opinions on things, such as I do as well, and then you've got to find a middle ground between the two.
I take it, Patrick?
Strong opinions.
He doesn't have strong opinions?
No.
No, okay.
No, not at all.
Yeah, that's very normal, right?
Yeah, good for the Horticulture New Zealand board to not have strong opinions, I think.
So I think one thing we should go back to is the beginning. So we're very lucky that I see a succession involving two parts. The first part is an asset part, and you need to separate that from what is the most difficult part, which is the power and management part. So having a clear understanding of how the assets move was easy for us because we put our assets some long time ago into a trust, so they aren't our assets. So that wasn't part of the discussion. The biggest part of the discussion became about power and management. And when you've been looking at a balance sheet and the bank account every day for God knows how many years, it gets really difficult to just sort of blank out and say, we're not going to look at it again. What we've managed to do, not quite as fast as I think would have been appreciated, but we've managed to do a transference of that. I guess the things I point out are, as an older person, you need to be really careful about two things. One is, for all of us looking at businesses that we're involved in, the governance role means you don't interfere with management. So one of the great things you've got to be aware of is not overriding discussion that the current manager gives to staff by saying, no, you shouldn't do it some other way. No, there's only one manager on the place. They should always be the person who says how things happen, and you should support them. And that becomes really important.
And of course, that works perfectly all the time.
Yeah.
I
was just going to ask.
From my perspective, what it comes down to as well is that Dermott and Lindsay, my mum, have been the sole controllers of their life for decades. And so I can't have this expectation that it's going to change immediately.
Old habits die hard.
Old habits die hard, or never die at all when you're someone trying to succeed your parents. You need to be aware of the fact that they've been living in such a way and made these decisions in such a way for so long, and work with that as opposed to rail against it. Sometimes you do rail against it, and we have. We've always been pretty successful in trying to separate business and family, and having really frank discussions as family members. We do have a area where there's 4 votes on the board, but both of our wives hold each other's proxies. So neither of us can get anything past the board without both of their votes, which is quite disappointing when you want to buy new toys. And it does mean, however, that we all engage, right? We all approve something.
So can I ask a question? Was there some, and this is one of the questions that's come from the audience there, was there something that triggered you to start having these conversations? Or was it just timing?
Once we got into the current business that we're in, I knew that I always wanted to succeed Mum and Dad. That was always a goal. Yep. They had always said that the business is structured in such a way that could happen. Then we had this period of time where that didn't actually happen, even though it might have been the stated intent. And Dermott and Lindsay were probably quite comfortable with that quid pro quo. And Rebecca and I were probably extremely frustrated with that. And so what it came down to is we just decided to do something about it. Because if we were just going to sit there getting angry and not doing anything about it, then nothing was going to happen.
So the phrase I use often is that it's the current generation is often the ones who are worried about having the conversations. The next gen is worried about not having them, right? They want these things to start happening on that. While I've got you there, there's a question here. Do you have siblings, and would that have changed anything?
So I scared my parents off any other kids. I don't know if it would have changed.
We promised you a frank conversation
here,
right?
I've got 2 kids now, so 10 and 7. And so I'm having those considerations now about how that might look for them, because we are trying to approach this as a multi-generational business, so building assets for the next generation whilst still benefiting the current. I think it would be different because it is easier having just one.
It's such good planning, right?
Yeah.
Such good planning.
I
know one business that for 3 generations they had 1 child.
Having said that,
that was superb.
Sometimes I would have liked to have someone else to lean on.
Yeah, I'm sure you would.
Just to go back, because I think it's hard to compact all of this into one thing. One of the important stages, I think, that happened, because Patrick asked for it, was actually we had the family trust. That was fine. We had the trustees. Patrick joined the trustees. But hang on, Rebecca was sitting there. And the introduction of allowing her to join the trustees and be a full and complete part of it was a really important part about engaging that connection to the process, because I think we can feel we're transferring assets over time, but everyone has to be engaged. Otherwise, it falls apart.
Yeah, and that's probably part of the transparency, right? Yeah, on that. Okay, Allan.
Unlike Patrick and Dermott, Dermott, isn't it? Yeah, Dermott here. I come from a Chinese family, and one of the philosophies there is have lots of children because we need more cheap labour. So, so therefore the conflict is a little bit more, we're a little bit more challenging in our family, okay? So for us, we're not unlike we're very alike actually, except that my natural personality is very forgiving and loving, of course. So we don't have many arguments at all.
People can ask me the truth later afterwards over a cup of coffee.
So 2 families on my side, brother. I have 3 nephews all in the business. I have 1 son, 1 daughter, 1 son in the business, and I also have a daughter-in-law in the business. So the dynamics here, it took us a long time to get some common ground to where we are. So I took a position, like I've worked for like 50 years in the farming, and I know what it's like, unlike, probably not dissimilar to everybody in this room. So we probably should have started this process a lot earlier, but it's taken us quite a mission to get here, where we are today. And it is a live and active document. And we have a document, I have a document here, and we've had 10 versions of it that we have to review all the time, and it's ongoing. But one smart thing I did do was, because my young generation is still quite young and most of them were single, I said sign here. Right? And so they're locked in for a little bit. But now they're starting to get partners now, and so we have to reactivate that and just coming challenges where every family member has a role, and then new members may be coming in, and that sets another set of challenges again. And it's taken us a real process. It's not easy, but I think it depends what each member wants in their life in this journey, and I'm assuming that every family is very different.
Yeah, okay. A couple of questions here. One was, how do you manage the urban-based, non-farming sister-in-law that simply sees the farm as a pot of gold? And phrases like self-entitlement and that sort of thing are also in that question. So that's one question. And the other one was, how do you manage when you've got, basically asset-rich, cash-poor? Any responses to those 2 questions from me?
Probably more directed at me, I think. Okay, so how do I approach this one? So I have so in my siblings, like I lost a sister some 10 years ago. And so I have a niece and a nephew. So she had a shareholding in the original family farm. So we bought her out, basically. So we had to come up with the money and bought the shareholding out, and we helped my niece and my nephew, who are all in their 30s now, 30s, 40s, 30s, mid-30s, that helped them establish their families. They're not in the business as such anymore, but they are always welcome, and they are always welcome to join in family meetings. We still have Christmases together. Whoopie woo, So yeah, so
that's
and I've seen many a family in my area where it's collapsed, where they haven't got things right. So we're doing some things right, I have a daughter who is actually not. She doesn't act, well, she sort of does. She's just in there, kick my butt all the time. But she's not actively. Sorry?
She doesn't work in the business.
Well, she does help with, some social media stuff.
I'm sure she's going to be on your board at some point.
Yeah. So I have a daughter and a daughter-in-law within the business, along with 3 nephews and a son. So they all have their particular roles. So it's just because I am loving and forgiving, right? That is how we smooth the path.
Just want to state on the value thing. We have the traditional structure where you work for peanuts. The timesheet's set at 40 hours every week, no matter how many hours you do.
Yes.
And thankfully, they haven't assigned wage theft against business owners it's just against employees, because it'd be pretty grim. But then what we've done is recognise that in terms of the future transfer of assets.
Yes.
Whereas I've got people I know in other businesses and friends and stuff in Whangarei where they've done the same thing and worked for low wages for a family business but not had ownership, and that are expecting to buy it out. And so there's no recognition of value in that transition. So you've given your time, you've given your blood, you've been paid low amount because you're aspiring to something else, and then all of a sudden that additional value isn't being valued. That's where I think there can be problems. It's easier for me because there's a single linear transition, but even within us, we still recognise the value that we've all put in terms of the hours above and beyond and the value that we've not received.
Yes. Okay, cool. Thank you. Question to both families. Do you encourage university and study in the next generation?
You should answer this one.
For me, my parents did, and they supported it, and I was very lucky that they did.
Yep.
They probably think that I could have skipped the first year. Probably wasn't as productive as it could have been otherwise.
My first year is a dim memory, I have
to
say.
I'm very proud to see the mention of hops included in horticultural products, because I did a lot of studying of that in first year university. I'd have to say for me now as a parent, it's not an expectation, but it's something that I'll support. Yep. Certainly when I went to university, the expectation was to grow and learn, and university would be good, but not a requirement.
Yep.
But also I wasn't expected to return back to the business immediately afterwards. And so I think for my kids, I want to give them all the support I can and as much freedom as I can, and if they choose to be engaged, support that as much as possible.
Yeah, you don't want your kids being frog-marched in or feeling like they're being frog-marched in. Yeah.
He forgot the other part, which is redirection. I much prefer the word redirection than retirement. I think redirection is a much better word.
Yes, I like that.
Patrick's idea of redirection, getting into management, he sent me off to university, so I'm now studying a master's.
Excellent. Allan, what about for you? What did you do?
So that's actually in our family charter as well. So we set aside a fund for further education on any aspect of children, grandchildren, whatever. So most of my nephews and my own children have all had tertiary education. Good or bad. I mean, I come from a school of hard knocks, actually, so I actually didn't go to university. But, they also bring in a skill set that my brother and I just lack. We have, there's a huge so when I had my children, I saw black and blue, there wouldn't be a generation gap, all right? Yeah, we all know the story of that. Yeah. Because I come from a family, my family, immigrants, and of course not understanding the Western education, the Western way, I sort of saw black and blue. I'm not going to have that generation gap between me and my children because I'm Kiwi born and raised, right? Oh, how wrong I was, So education is absolutely very, very important. Yeah.
Okay. Another question here around the whole succession process. What professionals did you bring in and find useful? The question is, lawyers, financial advice, that sort of stuff. Who and what did you use?
So we obviously didn't bring anyone professionally in to manage the process, but Rebecca and myself did bring in someone for sort of consultancy and support, and we found that was of a critical benefit, to be honest. They were constantly having the conversation with us, do you realise how far you've come? You sit there and you go into the day and day, and you look at it maybe a month later and you go, oh, Christ, he's still doing the same old things. We're not doing where we want to be, and I can't imagine where Dermott and Lindsay were at because they're at the other end of it, having been involved. But it's someone independent that you can sit down with and they can show you how far you've come and coach you a little bit on where you are to go and coach you a little bit on managing some of the frustrations that always happen with family, but especially happen with family business. Yeah. That was a critical element for us.
So the comment I'd make to that is you need a range of professionals, but they have to be able to handle the messiness and somewhat craziness of family. Right? I've seen where people have been brought in, say, from a corporate background, and they don't cope because they can't cope with the disagreements or the messiness and that sort of thing. I don't know whether you experienced any of that, but
Yeah, we have, absolutely. Yeah, and really difficult stuff. You know, we've had to deal internally with HR stuff. You know, you've got staff that you know, especially from different generations of staff, and you know, we've got family members telling them they need to do this, and they complain about it, and you have to manage it through a process. Yeah, lots of difficult things. None of it's easy, but it is all manageable if you talk about it.
good. Allan, what did you bring in?
Yes, so if we're talking about the succession journey, definitely you need lawyers or solicitors, and you need a good financial advisor, either your accountant or someone else in that industry. But I can honestly say, without someone like Philip, we would not have been able to do it. And it's still active, you know, it's still ongoing.
What's your bank
Need a
account number,
discount.
Allan?
Need a
What's your bank
discount.
account number? I'll send some cash through there. Yeah.
Okay. So absolutely necessary. And with that, we have a family charter, which is we do revise. We're due for a revision, and it will be ongoing.
Okay. Another question, which is a really, I think, a key one here, and it's basically saying, how do you separate business from family in terms of the conversations you're having around around the business and what's going on versus, I don't know, a birthday celebration or something like that. And do you get, the question here is, do you still get caught up with wanting to make mum and dad proud, or you think, what would dad do when making decisions?
That last one is yes,
Uh-huh.
very simply. They're your parents. They're your role models in lots of ways. So I think, you know, I assume the same might be true in your family. You consider your parents. You look up to them. Although I'm taller than you now, so look down to them. I don't know. That's an absolute yes. You want to see them do well. You want to make them proud of you.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Nice. Lovely, lovely. Allan, what do you think?
Well, my mum's 97. She still gives me a rollicking. Okay. There we go.
Why am I not surprised, Allan? Dermott.
His mum gives him a rollicking. I just go back to the point about managing people and things. One of the things that caused us great difficulty was the change from my time of expectation out of people to managing people, which is the new environment. And Lindsay and I still expect people to bloody work when they come out. And we're likely to tell them that quite directly. Unfortunately, now Patrick has to find the sticking plaster put over the top of that.
If I could just go to the earlier part of that question as well, around managing the relationships. So we are constantly talking about family and business because it's a family business, and there's not a lot of separation of it often. Where we put our foot down and say, this is not a business thing, there is. But you have to make it clear. Because if we don't, we'll be at a birthday party for one of the kids, and you and I will sit down and just start kind of talking about it, because it's the thing that you talk about.
That's right.
So if you're there for a reason, you kind of need to state that reason and make sure of it. Probably one of the big things that we've done differently over the last 5 years is we've moved from having our family meetings at dinner, often on a Sunday, to doing it during work hours on a weekday, because it is a business conversation and should be treated as such. Particularly because we're also looking at bringing in, potentially an independent chair if we need to, or some other form of involvement, and they don't want to sit down at 6 p.m. on a Sunday and have a conversation about work. So why should we expect that of ourselves?
So my daughter works for me, and I love her to bits, and she is now 28, and she started working with me, I think, about the ripe old age of 24, and she lives with me. We run the business from home, and we're very close, right? And so we had rules, and we'd talk about hats. What hat are you wearing, right? And so we would make sure that we didn't talk business in the kitchen table. It would always be in the office. If I'm calling her, I would start the conversation when she answered the phone. I'd say, "Hi, it's Dad here." So she knew I was checking in what was going on at uni or something like that. If it was Phil, it was a business thing. And the same with the emails. And those little signals just tell you the context of the conversation that you're having. Right? And they're very simple. With one family, we had them in a big room, and we had 2 tables set up. And when we were talking about family issues, they sat at that table. When we started talking about the business issues, they literally walked 3 meters to the other table. And that separation was enough for them to get their head around, okay, this is a family conversation or this is a business conversation. And that hat confusion is really, really important to manage, because otherwise you feel like you're just talking about the business the whole time. All right? The only challenge I had was when I had to do my daughter's performance appraisal with her just woeful performance. And that was one of the more difficult conversations I think I've ever had in my life. But we got through it. She still talks to me. All right.
I haven't had to do one of those yet.
Yeah, exactly. All right, there's some more questions here. Allan, they want to know, oh God, what have I done here? When are you going to take your beautiful face off your marketing? And when are you going to put...
I am already the mascot, okay? So I did a huge plunge about a year ago, so all operational. I'm not even the CEO anymore. I've stepped down, although I sort of sit above them, sort of.
Can you talk a little bit about what you did with the 3 boys? Because it's really impressive.
So everyone has a role, and we sort of identified strengths and weaknesses amongst each of our family members. And my oldest nephew, who's been with me for 8 years, most experienced, he's actually not the CEO. It's his younger brother who's actually the CEO, and he was just far, far more suited for the role.
Hasn't he had the right skills?
Yes, yes. One of the hardest roles when I was in CEO was that we were in families as my brother and my sister-in-law, myself and my wife, and one of the hardest things that I did was I sacked my sister-in-law. You know, I've got to watch my back these days when I go. and that was really, really difficult. You know, it was a really difficult choice. Wasn't easy, but we still have Christmases together, okay? So we've gotten over that. So we try and put the right skill set into the right position. So I can't put a round peg in a square hole, basically.
Cool. All right, question to both of you, and this is a real hot button issue. With the increasing divorce rates and partners coming in and being involved, Patrick, your wife is a director, I understand that. How are you managing this? How are you managing the asset protection, that sort of thing? What are you doing? Because it's a tricky one, and it's one of those challenging conversations but you've got to have it. It's the one I dread the most, but you've got to have it. Who would like to start?
We started it at the beginning. So when my wife and I got into business, we decided that we'd run the business through mirror trusts. So she had a trust, I had a trust. And the trust never traded, they owned a company. And the company did all the training. So when we moved along to later on, Patrick became a trustee. But the trusts were written on an enduring basis. So, and I think this is probably one of the areas that we will need to give consideration to in the modern world. If you write the trust specifically to very young people, that information has to be declared to them. So having a discretionary trust nowadays has some benefits in terms of bringing people up with an understanding of money and the assets they're going to run later on. But I think once your children have decided to marry, then they've created a partnership that those assets need to be shared over.
Yeah, and I'd say also that there became a point where Rebecca and I had been together long enough that she was a fellow family member as opposed to just a daughter-in-law, and she works in the business as well as being a director. She was recognised as being a mother to our children, and therefore the trust had recognition of that if we were to divorce. But we've since moved into a point where we actually want to know now how we would manage things if something the worst were to happen, because if we try and deal with it then, it's way too late, and it's getting horribly messy. And the kids are the only one that's going to suffer, really.
So do you have a prenuptial agreement, can I ask?
No, we don't. But we don't because we are now partners in the business.
Yes, okay.
So she is a full partner with Mum and Dad and myself, so we all equally have ownership of the share.
we have an understanding about an asset split as to how things will be dealt with, and that was dealt with on an interesting basis. What we discussed was, what did you put in? What does the next generation put in? How do you recognize that? Because part of us, for us older people here, is we got into business to build an asset. We need to understand the next generation has as much right to have ownership and building of an ownership of their asset as we had in doing ours.
Okay, Allan, what are you doing?
So my younger generation, because we came quite late, they're still single, although they are still, so 2 of them have partners now, although my son's been married for a number of years, so that's and that was before we started this process. So the hard question, prenup, yes. So that has been discussed right now, and my first nephew, there's no disagreement there. Full discussion, honest, and that's come out quite well. So the prenup is actually to, the second relationship. The CEO, actually, I shouldn't say that, but he's just got a new partner, and that's in his early stages, but that is a very difficult subject to bring up, but we absolutely have to, and we sort of explained to everybody, that's just to protect the asset base that we have built, just in case something goes wrong, right? So one of the quick questions that came up in that discussion was, does that mean we can get married and divorced several times without losing our assets? And I said, right on.
We have had friends who have been married and have split and have suffered horribly from not structuring it well.
Yes.
And that was also part of the reason why we wanted to make sure that it was structured well now.
This is God, I'm looking at the time, we're running out. This is a huge issue and incredibly important. I've got a family in the South Island where we are trying to renegotiate 4 retrospective prenuptial agreements with people who've been married between 20 and 30 years. And it's a mess. Right? It's a complete mess on that. I'm getting the numbers have turned red on us here, so I think we're about out of time. There are a couple of other questions here, toxic family members. I think for the ones I didn't get to, please come and talk to these people here or come and talk to me on that. Rowena, you're giving me the evil eye, so we better go off. I'd just like to thank Patrick and Dermott and Allan. They've been absolutely fantastic. Appreciate the honesty. Please, I think to some degree, 4 walls confidentiality here. They've been very honest and very frank, and appreciate that. So thank you all on that one. Please give them a hand.